MP Alexei Goncharenko has told LBC President Trump's their only hope of a deal.
Unfortunately, Putin is afraid of two people in the world, Chairman Xi and President Trump. He's not afraid of Europe. And unfortunately, Europe has not made almost nothing to prove to Putin that he should be afraid of Europe.
A woman's been jailed for 10.5 years for the deaths of 4 paddleboarders on an organised trip in Pembrokeshire in 2021. A court heard Nerys Lloyd wasn't remotely qualified to lead the tour, which went ahead in poor weather without any safety briefing. The Chancellor's told LBC she's still upbeat about the chances of a trade deal with America. Rachel Reeves is in Washington for meetings a day after the International Monetary Fund downgraded its forecast for UK growth. And the Vatican's considering extending the hours for mourners to file past Pope Francis's open coffin. He's lying in state for 3 days. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 74 points at 84.03. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.16. LBC weather clear in the west tonight. Mist and fog developing for eastern and southern areas and a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Veterans being hounded over their service during the Troubles, going back all those years. Neil's in South Hams.
If a soldier has committed a war crime, they should be tried for it. It's quite binary.
A gentleman in his 70s or 80s appears before one of these tribunals and is asked, why did you open fire? Because I was ordered to by my senior officer. Oh, let's bring him present. I'm afraid he's dead. Why should that 80-year-old bloke be dragged over possibly to Belfast to a tribunal there when he was carrying out legitimate orders? Why should he have to go through the emotional toil and turmoil of that?
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's the final cross question of the week on Wednesday. It's 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. On the panel with me tonight, our very noisy panel already. We have Layla Moran sitting next to me, already disobeying the silence rules, as usual, frankly.
I can't hear you.
She is Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, and she now chairs the Commons Health and Health and Social Care Committee. Sir Robert Buckland next to her is a barrister, former Conservative Justice Secretary. To my right, Ava Vidal is a comedian and journalist, and next to her, Lance Forman, Managing Director of the smoked salmon producer H. Forman and Sons, and a former MEP for the Brexit Party and later the Conservatives. So they're here to answer your questions. Lots going on today. It's St George's Day, or is it? Lots of comments on Donald Trump's latest admonition of, is that the right word, of President Zelensky. But you can phone in on anything you like. 0345 6060 973. That's the number to WhatsApp too. You can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, first question. It's from Chris in Wimbledon. Hi, Chris.
Oh, hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. So my question really is, on this day, St George's Day, which obviously is a day of being proud of your British heritage, even though, as you mentioned, St George was, I think, of Greek origin. But nevertheless, the question I have is, why is it Keir Starmer has kept completely silent on the aspect of reclaiming the 300 or 250 billion euros of Russian assets, which could help in rebuilding Ukraine, rearming Ukraine, and also be a clear sign to Putin that we're not to be played with. I mean, Trump really has no cards. Whilst he says he has all the cards, he's already a Putin lackey. And it's clear from the very outset he's not going to stand up to Putin, and Putin isn't actually scared of Trump because he knows that he's going to play the game. So we need to have that Churchillian moment where Keir Starmer steps into the breach and takes a lead, and which Europe will follow, in order to defend what is right, what is just.
Okay. So, effectively, why isn't Keir Starmer standing up as a leader of Europe against Putin? Lance Forman.
Well, on the question of seizing assets, I'm not sure that's something that Britain would do unilaterally without agreement of our partners, both the US and perhaps in Europe too. But I think Keir Starmer's doing what he is, he's doing what he can do best at trying to steer Donald Trump in the right direction. The Ukraine battle is all about self-determination for Ukrainians. I think Donald Trump is, he says he's trying to bring peace. He's trying to sort of flatter Putin to try and bring about some negotiation, but I think it's a wrong strategy, quite honestly. We have to stand up for the Ukrainians. I have a colleague that I worked with the last 30 years who's been living in Kiev. He married a Ukrainian girl. And the Ukrainian people want their independence. And if we believe in self-determination as a nation, we have to go with what the people in that country want. And we do have to support them. I employ people from the Baltics. They're very, very concerned about the possible spread if Putin succeeds in Ukraine. But of course, the entire situation is dangerous and delicate, so we have to be very careful. And I think Starmer's doing what he can. I mean, I don't think there is a huge amount Britain can do alone, but he's doing what he can.
OK. Layla.
So, first of all, apologies to Chris. I was fiddling with my earphones during that, so I didn't hear everything he said. But to the question as Iain posed it, I would argue that actually there is general cross-party support for Ukraine, on doing whatever we can as a nation in order to seize those Russian assets, to release that money to the Ukrainian people. I was in Ukraine earlier this year, had the privilege of meeting with counterparts out there, asking them, where are they with this war? They were talking about how actually they've got a real issue with men coming back from the front lines. They need rehabilitation, and the families know that they're going to rehabilitate them, and possibly, if this doesn't end, send them right back out there. I had a Ukrainian refugee living with my family for a year from Crimea originally. She ended up with us because she was at university in Kharkiv and had nowhere to go. We stand with the Ukrainian people, and actually I think the strength of the British Parliament currently remains that we are united in that. What we are trying to do is push this government, as we did the last, further, faster on the seizure of assets. For example, there are other countries, Canada, for example, individuals where we could have gone further, faster. But there is general unitedness. And I think, we still see support in the British public. If this comes up on doors, it's support.
Is the problem with the frozen assets that if they are effectively sequestrated, that could lead to a diminution of confidence in Britain's approach to the rule of law, that it could affect the value of the pound, it could affect markets in some way?
Yeah, they do say it's complicated. When I've spoken to my sister party Ukrainian counterparts, what they say is actually one of the ways around it possibly is that you actually sequester the money and instead use it to support Ukrainians who are still wanting to be here. So we know that Ukrainians in this country are facing moratoriums on their visas. That's affecting their ability to get jobs. They aren't getting the same support.
That doesn't help Ukraine.
It does, because what it says to the Ukrainian people is that we're spending this money on Ukrainians, and they still believe, and many of the Ukrainians who are here want to one day go back.
The Ukrainian government needs munitions. It obviously cares about its people that are here, but that's
ideally,
if America pulls out of this, which it seems as though it's going to do, and not provide any more military aid to Ukraine, it's got to come from somewhere else. The only way it can come from somewhere else is if Europe steps up to the mark.
I totally agree, and that's why we are pushing for more defence spending, and we've been very vocal about this in the House. In fact, a large number of Lib Dem MPs were sanctioned by Putin today. I was sad to not be on the list. I felt, what more could I do? I feel like I need to write in and complain. But nevertheless, I think the point that my Ukrainian MP counterparts were making was that their biggest fear is that the British public lose support for Ukraine, because we are spending money on Ukrainians. And if we ended up spending money owed to Ukraine on Ukrainians, even in the UK, as a second best option, that would be all right.
Ava?
I think Keir Starmer probably hasn't, given a definitive answer yet, because he has to wait, doesn't he? He has to probably go outside and lick his finger and see which way the wind's blowing.
It's very uncharitable.
But that's what he does.
But
he
surely
does, though. He's a flip-flopper.
But don't you think, though, on this issue, he's actually has been a leader. He's almost usurped Macron as the leader of Europe on this.
I didn't see that when he was standing with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was literally laughing at him, going, "Hey, you can win the war without us." And he was just standing there, and he just doesn't make any strong decisions until he's absolutely certain of which way the wind is blowing. If he gets enough public support, he will do so. I don't think cross-party support is enough. I think it has to be...
Do you think, as Layla says, sort of support in this country is still strong, or is it declining?
I think it's just England, isn't it? Britain, really. We do lose interest after a little while. Unfortunately, it's just how we
Attention span
are.
of a flea.
Huh?
Attention span of a
Exactly.
Okay, Robert?
Well, look, I think there are huge principles here. And to answer Chris's question about sanctions, the problem with sanctions is that unless you declare a state of war, and, in the Second World War we sequestrated all the assets of the Germans of the Nazi regime and used them, you're in this sort of never land. And international law is very clear about, the dangers of using the assets, not just to freeze them, but to use them in a way that, we want to spend them.
But it's not impossible, is it?
I don't think it is impossible. I do think that with creative thinking, the international community should be able to come up with a framework, for example, a conflict framework, where you could actually preserve some of these assets. And, the interest on these assets will be huge in itself. There've got to be imaginative ways in which we can use at least some of these assets to the benefit of the Ukrainian people. There's a principle here. As has been said by us, this is self-determination. This is the freedom of Europe. If not Ukraine, it will be the Baltics, it will be Georgia, it will be other countries. And it's no good the Americans coming in half-baked with a sort of let's get the deal done attitude. We've seen in the past where American statesmanship has worked. The Dayton Accords, other peace processes, which took
that was
ages.
Where an American president was playing the role of honest broker. This president cannot be an honest broker, given that he seems to... He never utters a criticism of Putin.
I entirely agree with you. He's behaving as if he's an agent of Putin rather than an honest broker. And the more he admonishes Zelensky, and the more he undermines Ukraine, the more he does damage to the cause of freedom. I find it beggars belief that this president thinks that this is a way to conduct himself.
Just on that, let's add another question into the mix here from Gareth in Wilmslow, who says, can the UK simultaneously make a trade deal with the US whilst taking a contrary position in relation to American policy on Ukraine? This is the diplomatic tightrope that Keir Starmer is having to walk, isn't it?
I entirely agree. I think, to be fair to the Prime Minister, I don't think he's got many options. He has to play nicely with the American government. I think that there are two strands here. I think that, in a way, if the Americans are saying, look, Europe, get on with it and step up to the plate, well, British leadership is going to be essential because we're a permanent member of the UN. We're a big nation in terms of defence and security. We have the Five Eyes arrangement with the States. We are a major player here, and we have to step up in a big way. And if that may well be actually what the Americans want. So the two issues aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. I think you can pursue both strands.
But Layla, I suspect you have a different perspective on this because, Ed Davey has set himself up as number one Trump critic in this country.
Yeah, because if by the same logic, why does Trump think that Putin is someone he kind of wants to be a friend with and he won't give Zelensky the time of day? And that's because he responds to strength. And so we think that it's about strategy at this point. And, the counterfactual is always hard to prove, but our view is that Trump is someone, you can kiss his ass and be strong at the same time, but just be very clear about who you are and what you stand for, and you know who you are, and you're not going to... I think what Ava said about, the finger in the wind is entirely right on foreign policy when it comes to Keir Starmer, because it looks like, and what the question I think is alluding to, is that Keir Starmer will just do whatever. And actually, therefore, he doesn't come across as someone who knows himself. So there is personal chemistry there, right? So when Trump and Starmer met, people were very surprised that they got on. So that's great. That's part one. But part two is, does everything that we do follow what we say? Does everything that we do as a nation follow who we are as the British people? And the point Ed Davey's trying to make is that actually right now we're looking at two different directions, and that makes us look weak.
Isn't it actually much simpler than that? It is realpolitik that Starmer's doing what he has to do, and it's all very well to carp from the opposition sidelines. That's an easy place to be. And as soon as, if Ed Davey, if you suddenly became part of a Lib-Lab coalition, perish
not going to happen.
Obviously.
Not going to happen,
and Ed Davey was Foreign Secretary. I suspect that he would be adopting a slightly different position.
But even people within the Labour front benches, I think privately, would say that. And the job of the opposition is to say the quiet bits out loud. So I don't think they're not already thinking it, but I do think we need to be there and saying these things. If we just keep quiet, then it just goes too far in the other direction. The point about His Majesty's government, okay, we're not the proper official opposition, although we're aiming for it, but the point is that we say the things that the government cannot say, and actually that has its part to play in our democracy.
Okay. Ava?
Yes.
The follow-up question, can the UK simultaneously make a trade deal with the US while taking a contrary position in relation to American policy on Ukraine?
I don't think so, not with Trump. I think the way he is conducting himself, putting tariffs on, he's not making friends with anybody. He's often incoherent.
Apart from Putin.
Well, yes, apart from Putin, which, begs the question why. I think it's... he does respond to, like Layla said, like a strongman leader. He's very, very macho and stuff like that. I don't think he's going to let Keir Starmer deviate from anything. I don't think he's thinking long-term of the economic prospects for the US. You can see it by the moves he's making. He really doesn't care. And I don't think he will allow Keir Starmer to have that trade deal unless he does what he says.
Lance?
We absolutely have to do a trade deal with the USA. I think the two things are unrelated. And the one thing I would say from Trump's perspective is that I'm sure what must be running through his head is that when Ukraine was invaded by the Russians in 2014, when Obama was president, the West did nothing. We sat by and let it happen. And that's when we should have acted.
I totally agree with that.
It's too late now, actually. In many respects, it's too late now.
I'm trying to remember back to those times, and I can remember everyone getting very exercised about what was going on in Syria at the time. And I can't remember sort of if it was exactly at the same time that Russia then took Crimea, but it's sort of a bit like 1956 when everybody concentrated on Suez and the Russians invaded Hungary. So maybe we all took our eyes off the ball.
Actually, I'll admit to something. I have changed my mind over what we should have done in Syria back then as well. And I think it was a really... I wasn't part of Parliament when this happened, but I remember being a candidate and sort of being against the idea of sort of taking any action. And now I do this role, and I was Foreign Affairs spokes for a while, and actually I think that was a mistake. And I think it was a classic example, and I think Parliament as a whole, I wasn't the only politician at the time, I think, grappling with this. You learn the wrong lessons from the past.
Yes.
And many of us had come into politics. I came into politics, and in part I'm a Lib Dem because of the Iraq War and because of the stance on what happened over the Iraq War, and that was very much what developed my politics. And I think we took the wrong lessons from the Iraq War and then applied them incorrectly to what happened in Syria and also Crimea. I
entirely agree that I voted for intervention in Syria because I felt that lines had been crossed, and if the West didn't stand up then, we were making a statement by inaction. I agree that I think 2014 was not a great moment for the West. We stood by and ourselves made a statement to Putin that we felt that this was okay. But as Layla said, let's not draw the wrong lesson from inactivity in 2014, and let's stand firm now to make sure that we don't end up with NATO being, frankly, attacked by Putin.
Right, we're going to move on to some more subjects in just a moment. If you'd like to contribute to our debate, if you'd like to ask a question to the panel, the number to call 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp a question on that number too if you can't ring. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Goes on.
8:20 on LBC. You're listening to or watching Cross Question. Our panel, Layla Moran from the Liberal Democrats, Sir Robert Buckland, former Conservative Minister, Lance Forman, former Brexit Party MEP, and then later Conservative MEP, and Ava Vidal, who's never been a former anything, have you? You're very current, you are, actually. You're a current comedian and journalist. Right, let's have a text question from Andrew in Fulham. Yesterday, the IMF cut the UK's growth forecast by a third. Today, we also learned that government borrowing in March was £14 billion more than anticipated. Rachel Reeves blames global events for nearly all of this. Does anyone on the panel agree with her? Or are most of our economic problems really self-inflicted by this government? Layla, let's start with you.
So, definitely, there's the global picture is not sweet. You know, we just had a discussion about Trump and tariffs and, you know, what stance should we take there? And the Liberal Democrat view is that we'd be better off being stronger, but also we need to create a sort of coalition of the willing, focusing much more on the Commonwealth and looking to Europe. And, you know, this is a long-standing view of the party. We knew that the botched Brexit deal from the Conservative Party took 4% off GDP.
We don't know that. That was an allegation made by a group
OBR.
of economists.
I think we can definitely
and
say...
our growth is higher than France and Germany and Italy and Spain.
And think how much higher
be...
it might be if our small businesses could still sell stuff into France and Spain and Italy and all the rest of it. So regardless of what we've done now, let's do even better by looking to Europe. But I do think there has been some own goals by this government, and they have been pretty woeful. And I think there's two I'd point to. The first is the national insurance contribution increases. So we are now seeing it. So it was the beginning of April, so this month, that small businesses are starting to have to feel this. But also, it's the social care sector. It's the fact that the government put a huge amount of money into the NHS. They say £22 billion. It's actually a little bit smoke and mirrors. Because the vast majority of that is going to pay themselves. And I raised this at the liaison committee with Keir Starmer, and he was a bit flummoxed by the fact that the amount of money they're giving local government to cover the next increases for the social care sector barely washes its own face. And it's just so nonsensical that they've done this to the economy. So I think, yes, there were global headwinds, and I think we need to accept that it's the majority of it. But I would also say, with respect to Rachel Reeves, that when it comes to enablers of the economy, like the NHS and social care, they've really done an own goal here.
Talking of smoke and mirrors, let's talk to the purveyor of excellent smoked salmon. I don't know if you want to reveal this figure, Lance, but this NIC rise, I mean, you run a business, I don't know how many people you employ, but I'm imagining this is going to cost you thousands of extra pounds every single month. Tens
of thousands of pounds. The national insurance increase is actually a double whammy. You know, people assume that your employment costs are going up, but actually what it really means is that all of your supply input costs go up because every one of your suppliers employs people, and they're having to put their prices up to cover the cost of their extra employment costs. So since the date of the budget, we have seen all of our suppliers been putting their prices up anywhere between 5 to 10%. In anticipation of having to pay more NI. So we're not only having to face those cost increases, but now from the beginning of April, our own employment costs have gone up. It's an absolute killer. It's no other European country is facing this. This was a unilateral decision by Rachel Reeves. It was economically illiterate, and it's crippling for our economy. Not only that, she's gone even further. We've heard a lot about the farmers and the inheritance tax changes that will impact on them. But she's removed business property relief, which means that any small business owner who sadly will one day pop his clogs will have to that business will have to pay 40% tax on the assets rather than pass down to the next generation. So what family business, and 90% of businesses in the UK are family businesses, what family business has an incentive to keep it going for the next generation? They may as well pack their bags and just move on. And we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of people exiting the country. And there have been a huge amount of business closures just in recent months, and everything comes back to Rachel Reeves' budget. It was an absolute disaster, and it's tragic that it wasn't.
You would accept there have been global issues at play here.
There have been some global issues too, but the the PMI index, the Purchase Managers Index, has just literally collapsed much more than any other European country, and it's on the back of her policies. I remember when, for that brief period, Liz Truss was Prime Minister, and she was locked in a room by the Bank of England and the Treasury Ministers saying, you've got to reverse your entire budget and sack your Chancellor. To be honest, that's exactly what Keir Starmer should have done, sacked his Chancellor and reversed every measure in her budget. It's been an absolute economic catastrophe.
Ava?
I agree that world events have had an effect, but also other countries have got their own problems. I mean, we talk about having more growth in France, but France have got, they're being chucked out of so many African countries at the moment. People are rebelling. A lot of their money comes from colonialism and stuff that does not belong to them, and people are not going to have that. But I do think when it comes to Rachel Reeves' budget, I would have to agree, it's a disaster. I think the problem is with Labour. They're just not appeasing anybody, are they? Every single economic policy they do is just hurting people. You're hurting business owners. I mean, at least the Tories, and I've said it on this show before, at least we know what they are. And the Tories go, OK, we support business, we support rich people, we support the wealthy. Labour have come in and they're not even keeping their core voter group happy. They've gone ham on the disabled. They've gone ham on poorer people. They've gone ham on business owners. They are just attacking absolutely everybody.
I haven't heard this phrase before, gone ham.
Have you never heard that before? Have you?
No.
Yes. Yeah.
I like it, though. I'm going to start using it.
He's down with the kids.
You what?
He's down with the kids.
I haven't used it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
I've never heard
he's
it
just
before.
like...
I've learned something.
I've never used
They've gone Labour have gone out there. Rachel Reeves has gone out there with a scattergun and just gone... and just attacked every section of society. Labour are going to get so crushed at the next election. It's going to be... it's going to be...
For those of you who aren't watching, Ava's face was a picture there.
Told you so.
Well, I think Ava's analogy of the scattergun is really good because, Labour came into office. It's very clear now they had no plan, no clue about how to run the economy and no fleetness of foot when it comes to the rapidly changing circumstances that we face since the election. I mean, you look at the issues that we fought on last July. It looks almost quaint now compared to the national security, international security crisis we're all facing. Defence spending is a huge pressure. I don't think Labour are being nearly enough bold on that. Some good moves, but nowhere near enough to really meet the challenge of our times. And this is a Chancellor now who is really tied in by her fiscal rule. I understand why, because she's very worried about government bonds, gilts as we call them here in the UK, becoming too good a buy and the yields on gilts going up, which is a big problem for the credibility of the government. And she's now tied herself into knots on very small amounts of money. I mean, you look at that last statement she made. She's talking about, it sounds, 14 billion is sound big money to all of us, but in terms of the Treasury and in terms of government spending, it is tiny. And every time an adjustment has to be made, there she is having to explain herself in a way that I think is deeply unhelpful for the stability of the economy. I thoroughly agree with the point about NI, national insurance contributions. You can't talk about growth and jobs and then put a tax on jobs, which is already having an effect on unemployment. It's inflationary. And look at the legacy. Interest rates in this country are still over 4%. In Europe, they're 2.25%. The Americans are cutting interest rates. What is happening to us here? That's millions of homeowners, millions of business people who need to borrow. And, of course, the government itself borrowing. And government borrowing is still more than defence expenditure in this country. And we know there's Neil Ferguson's rule about that. Any country that spends more on having to service its interest debt than on defence is in trouble.
We spend about double on interest than defence, don't we?
We do, and it's a problem. And America's going that way now, thanks to Donald J. Trump and his spectacularly bad economic policies.
Well, on that depressing note, let's go to the news, because I'm sure that'll cheer us up. It's 8:30 on LBC. Darryl Jackson has the headlines.
US President Donald Trump's attacked Ukraine's leader in a lengthy social media post, accusing him of prolonging a killing field and making inflammatory statements. Volodymyr Zelensky's refused to legally recognise the occupation of Crimea. The Chancellor has told LBC she's still upbeat about a trade deal with the US and Washington wants to do one too. Rachel Reeves is in Washington for a series of meetings. And the owner of a paddleboarding company has been jailed for more than 10 years for the manslaughter of 4 people. The group drowned in the River Cleddau in Haverfordwest in October 2021. LBC weather mainly clear in western areas tonight. Low cloud, mist and fog developing for eastern and southern areas. A low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
It's your
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32 is the time on LBC. We have with us Layla, Moran, Sir Robert Buckland, Lance Forman and Ava Vidal. Chris is in Birmingham. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Iain. Thank you for taking the call and the panel. Yeah, I've got an first experience within the last few days of what I can only call two-tier freedom of movement. And basically my granddaughter and her best friend, who have been at school since nursery, have left school, left education, and were planning to live and, work and travel through Europe. The only problem is my granddaughter's friend, who has a Polish mother and father, can do this, but my granddaughter can't. So my question to the panel is, do they think this is fair?
How long does she want to spend doing this?
They were planning on spending a couple of years working and just being freedom, just working and finding jobs in various countries. But as I say, she's found out that there is really a two-tier freedom of movement system because although they've been at school since they were little girls, now they're teenagers.
There is a chink of light on the horizon because this afternoon Rachel Reeves wouldn't rule out being in favour of the UK negotiating a youth mobility scheme between this country and the EU for 18 to 30-year-olds when the Chancellor spoke to LBC's political editor Natasha Clark earlier. And there do seem to be discussions going on this, and there's a big summit, I think on the 19th of May, where I suspect this is going to be something that, the European Commission are basically saying that they want this scheme to happen. What they're not telling us is the reality, and that they want European 18 to 30-year-olds all to be able to come to this country with no restriction on numbers, but they will only let our 18 to 30-year-olds visit one country. And that isn't, I don't think anybody would think that was particularly fair. And that's the stumbling block, as I understand it, with the discussions between the Labour government and Brussels. Ava.
Yes.
What would you like to say to this?
I think taking away those rights from our young people was one of the biggest disasters ever. I think they can grow so much from being able to travel, and I really do hope that Rachel Reeves can make some kind of deal, because I really think it's horrible that they're missing out in this way. And it's just annoying anyway. I used to giggle over Europe, and it's just a mess now. We could just go to Sweden, Norway, do some gigs and come back here, and now I don't even know how it works anymore.
How does British comedy go down in some of these countries? Because I think British sense of humour is pretty unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are there jokes that you tell here that get huge laughs and you go to Sweden and they just sort of don't get it?
No, not at all, actually. I think it all works pretty well. I think the reactions are what are different. Like in Holland, like we all went on stage, thought we were doing really badly, and then we came off and they were like, we were smiling really loud. And we're like, that didn't help. None of that helped. So it's just the way the audiences behave.
Yeah. Lance Forman, you and I both voted leave.
Yeah.
Freedom of movement was never a massive issue for me, I have to say. But for most Brexiteers it was. I have absolutely no objection to some sort of new scheme being set up, but it has to be equitable.
Yeah, freedom of movement wasn't a big issue for me either, Ian. You know, the decision to vote Brexit or Remain was a complex decision, and there were lots of reasons to support leaving and there were reasons to support remaining. And people weighed them up. Some were absolutely hardline on immigration. Others felt it was about sovereignty. Others felt it was about bureaucracy and economics and rules and so on. I think that young people should be able to travel. You know, working in another country, perhaps, you know, there should be sort of some kind of mutual agreement. But certainly for travel, I welcome Europeans coming here and learning about the UK, and I think that Brits should be able to travel to Italy and France and, learn about culture and so on over there too.
Well, let's talk to two Remainers on our panel. Robert Buckland, what's your view on this?
Well, look, I think some form of agreement to allow our young people to travel and work in Europe would be great for them. I think the principle of reciprocity, mutuality, does seem to make sense. One of the issues in the referendum was freedom of movement in its form then had seen a huge influx of people, particularly from the new countries coming in from Eastern Europe. And there was an issue as well about the ability of this country to remove people with previous convictions, sometimes for very serious offences. Much more was required under the freedom of movement rules. And that, of course, Brexit managed to change that. Though there's still frustrations about that, obviously. It's practically a very difficult thing to do sometimes. But answering the issues and the concerns that were raised then doesn't mean that we have to exclude opportunities for our young people. And I think that, the chances that I had to travel in Europe when I was young, freely without thinking about regulations or rules are ones that I'd want to see my children and other young people enjoy.
And we should point out that you can still do it for up to 90 days in a stretch. We're talking as if there's some sort of ban.
Well, it will surprise no one to know that the Liberal Democrat on the panel thinks that this should never have happened in the first place. And actually there were consequences for us. How many pubs in Oxford closed because they couldn't get the staff, and many of those staff had come as, transient workers for a year or two. They came, they learned English, they loved
that was surely more due to COVID than this.
No, it started well before, and then that was sort of the final blow. So it was a bit of
how do you explain the fact that there are more European citizens here now than there were at Brexit?
But many of them weren't here. They're not here as youngsters. They're not here in that same age bracket. So I think this is a no-brainer. And actually, the big prize, though, apart from the equity between generations, it's also the poorer young people who were benefiting from schemes like Erasmus+, which I also think we should join. I have the daughter of a friend who wanted to start her course in Spain. She couldn't get the visa in time. She ended up going, hoping that it would be okay, and ended up completing her course. It just that whole rigmarole, all of the stress, all of the calls to the FCDO to try and get the visa, just so she could go and learn, how to do music management in Spain for 3 months. Didn't need, because it's more than 90 days, didn't need to happen. All that stress for that young person would have been averted. So it just makes perfect sense to me that this is the low-hanging fruit, but the real prize is the veterinary agreement. And I think this has to be equitable. It's interesting about the one country thing. I'd like to explore that further. I'd not heard that, but I don't see how you enforce that with the Schengen zone. Because once you're in, and there is no passport check to get from France to Belgium to Italy and so on. So it must be about where you work.
Hasn't that changed recently?
No, it hasn't, no. So,
I'm sure that there is now a border post between Germany and Belgium. But
my parents live in Belgium. It's not something and my brother lives in Berlin, and my sister, who was in Clapton and now lives in Belgium with my parents, can't stay there, and now's moving back to Oxford, which is great for me. But it's affecting my family, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm not. Okay. That's not the issue. But Erasmus Plus is massive, and the veterinary agreement is the thing that then releases a lot of small businesses from a huge amount of red tape in importing and exporting from Europe, and that's the thing that would start to a little bit move that dial in the direction that Liberal Democrats want, which is that closer relationship, the trading relationship that benefits the economy.
See, I don't think many people, whether you're on the Brexit side of the argument or not, I don't think anybody's going to object to that. I mean, if you want free trade, do you?
On the veterinary agreement, absolutely, totally agree with it. Because, farmers or other food producers in other countries might come up with regulations that suit their country and Europe and so on, but they might not suit what we do over here. And for many food producers in this country, they have no dealings with Europe. They're not exporting to Europe. Why should a British food producer have to follow French rules in the product they produce? There should be mutual recognition of standards, not harmonisation of standards. And that is the way forward. With Europe, with America. I've never met an English person that's gone to France on holiday saying, I'm not eating that French food. I've never met a French person that came to the UK and said, I'm not eating British food. We recognise our standards. We recognise, we're not a third world country. We're developed countries, and we have our own, our own particular interests. And there should be, as I say, mutual recognition.
The fear, and actually, I think a lot of that can be sorted out in a dispute mechanism. But that said, you can't, on the one hand, have a trade agreement with America, who do have lower food standards. Than
not at all.
They do.
That's not true. I mean, I have audits. I have audits from the Food and Drug Administration in the USA, and I can guarantee you they are much fiercer than anything I've ever had.
There's a reason why the NFU are very concerned about American trade deal. They were really concerned about the New Zealand-Australian one, about flooding the market. And we've seen it with Welsh lamb. It has had an impact. But actually, the main fear for the American market is food standards.
So much of this argument about food standards isn't really about food standards at all. It's about protectionism. Yes, and that's bad for all economies. It's about protectionism for their economies. They just don't want, the Italians don't want Australian tomatoes coming in because they grow their own tomatoes. They don't want the competition, so they come up with standards to prevent other food products coming in. And so much of this is used as a tool for economic protectionism, and it's not good for consumers at all. It's to protect farmers. And as I say, I just think that the way forward...
But why shouldn't we be protecting farmers? That's a good thing to do, isn't it?
Well, protecting our own farmers, but we're actually harming our farmers if we all have to work to other people's standards. We should work to the standards that suit ourselves, and we should mutually recognise one another's standards. It's not as though we're producing dirty food. We're all, developed countries.
This is right, and actually British food standards are amongst the highest in the world.
Exactly.
Very often they outpace...
It's not going to be the issue.
The EU. Look, I think that... having a veterinary recognition regime would be good. I think it also deals with the Northern Ireland question as well.
Yes, very good point.
Which, was very much on my mind when I chaired the Select Committee. That anomalous position of Northern Ireland is not, nobody's happy with that. Surely there must be practical ways in which the government can get this sort of cooperation going. Doesn't mean that we're going to be marching back into a single market or a customs union anytime soon, but it does recognise the practical realities for many, many people and many small businesses who want to export.
The EU have got mutual recognition agreements with all sorts of different countries if they haven't got a full trade agreement with them. So, it shouldn't be impossible to negotiate that. And look, in the end, any international agreement, you've got to have give and take on both sides. And I think the problem that we've had since Brexit is that for maybe understandable reasons, the EU has been quite inflexible on some of these things, but I think that is starting to I get the impression that is starting to change, and we will see if that happens at this summit in May.
They're sending a message to other member states, don't do what Britain did, otherwise we will make life difficult for you. And I can understand that.
I think Trump is changing the equation.
Yes,
and I think people, if we think about the genesis of why the common market back in the day was created in the first place. People, it was first people who trade together don't go to war, but also there is safety in numbers. And I think we're seeing with these incredible global headwinds that Trump is creating, that there is now a softening on all sides. Actually, come on, guys, let's put the past in the past where it's at, and let's see what's practical.
And we can also see that on defence with Ukraine.
It begins with defence and security.
Absolutely.
Britain's leadership role in that.
But this idea that there should be some sort of defence agreement dependent on fishing, it's just
it is absurd.
Surely.
It is utterly absurd. And the French have been told off by many other European nations, don't conflate fishing issues with the defence of Europe. British defence manufacturing is a very important component. It could be incredibly useful as part of a wider European procurement market. Please, President Macron, don't use fish. Don't let fish get in the way of the defence of Europe.
Right. We're going to move on to a different subject in a moment and get ready for a lot of use of the word England. It's 8:45 on LBC.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:47 on LBC. Layla, Moran, Sir Robert Buckland, Lance Forman and Ava Vidal with us answering your questions. This is from Katie in Leeds, who wants to know, after you've all chatted about the benefits of travel and exploration, what do you think England and being English represents today? What about this country makes you proud? Obviously, St George's Day, but it isn't really. Apparently, it's now next Monday for reasons which we'll go into after 9 o'clock, because that's what we're going to be talking about for the whole hour. Robert.
Well, of course, as a very proud Welshman, I've got to qualify my remarks. I celebrate St David's Day, and in fact, this year I took part in a concert and was singing songs by Welsh composers and doing Dylan Thomas recitals. But for me, St George's Day is very much part of not just the English identity, but the identity of Britain and being British. But let's just pause for a moment about Englishness. I think over the years, people have said, it's too amorphous, nobody knows what being English is. I disagree. I think there is a coherent sense of Englishness. I think it's about fair play. I think it's about the rule of law. I think it is about equality under the law. And also that sense that we do rather like the underdog. If somebody's struggling a bit, if somebody perhaps, loses in sport or loses, dare I say, in elections, there is a sort of affection for the underdog in this country.
An affection for Wales?
Don't start me on that now. You know
Football,
my view.
Rugby.
I'm very, 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 very partisan about rugby.
Tennis.
I think, as everybody knows, football I'm a bit more relaxed
Wales
about.
are absolutely terrible at it at the moment.
Terrible at rugby. Yeah. Football is looking pretty good. We're doing pretty well. But to come back to the questions about England and Englishness, I do think, the reason why I have great affection and love for my English friends is that the values that they espouse are decent ones, and we forget that. We are a Judeo-Christian country with a Judeo-Christian tradition. That means that we're deeply steeped in the law, the belief in the rule of law, and what that means in terms of democracy. And we can't lose that. And I think we've got this argument now, about culture wars. Let's just be proud of our traditions, but be humble at the same time. And I think that combination of humility but quiet pride is really what the best of Englishness is about.
Lance.
I think two of the qualities that we used to think of in terms of being English or British, actually, are tolerance, as you say, sense of fair play, tolerance, and also our sense of humour was, I think, always something quite unique. But I do feel we've lost a bit of both of those in recent years, partly because of the growth of woke culture. It's very hard to be witty nowadays, but you'll tell me whether that's true or not. But it's very hard to joke now because you're accused. It is very hard. Comedians constantly complain that it's actually very hard to humour is much harder than it is or was in previous years, and I also think social media has had a negative effect on tolerance. It's created a lot of division and hatred. I've always thought that on Twitter, which you first introduced me to, Iain,
sorry,
blame you. I think one of the big problems with Twitter is that there's a like button, but if you dislike, you've got to explain why you dislike. So you're encouraged to, create division through your, argument or comments or abuse or whatever it is. If there was just a dislike button and no like button, so you actually explain why you think something's positive, maybe things would change. But I don't think social media has been terribly helpful. And I think humour's. But
why do you think it is that Scottish people are very proud to express their patriotism on St Andrew's Day? The same in Wales, the same in Ireland, and yet in England, it's never been a thing. We've almost been encouraged to have a sense of, I don't know about shame about being English, but if we shout about it, we have to be racist or something.
Well, that's right. I was just looking back at that tweet. Do you remember a number of years ago when Emily Thornberry was in the cabinet, and she tweeted a picture of some working class home with a couple of English flags hanging.
Rochester,
right? And she was forced to resign over that because it was quite a sneering, looking down on the working class, I don't know why that is. I think it's a shame that people shouldn't feel their Englishness just as they do their Welshness or Scottishness. So,
Ava,
I think it's a little bit different. I think that throughout time, English have been seen more as the oppressors. So if you go to Scotland, you're doing the Edinburgh Festival, you joke about the English, they will laugh at it. You go to Wales, you joke about the English, they will laugh at it, they enjoy it. I think when it comes to Englishness, I'm not even sure what it means because I never used to call myself English. I do now.
That's interesting. Why?
Well, when I was younger, I would have failed the Norman Tebbit cricket test, definitely. That was like, if you support everything English, and we didn't. We supported the West Indies. It's really when I went to the West Indies, and they were like, where are you from? And I was like, here. And they're like, you are not. And we were like, oh, I kind of felt a little bit displaced. The only thing I'll agree with Lance on, I don't think it's harder to be funny in an actual room, in an actual gig. But I would agree with him, actually, when he's speaking about social media. Because for goodness sake, mate, sometimes something's just a joke. It's just a joke. And you don't have to analyse something that everybody says. There's like a famous meme on Twitter that says it's the only website where you could go, oh my gosh, I really love waffles. And then somebody else would go, why do you hate pancakes? And you're like, oh, I never said that. And it just goes on and on and on and on. So I do think that social media has made it in such a way that a joke cannot be taken in the spirit that it was intended. But I don't think it's completely also woke culture. I think that there's more.
But, Little Britain could not be made in 2025, could it?
No, it couldn't.
The BBC have scrapped a lot of the scenes from the iPlayer version of it.
Yeah.
So, that kind of proves that Lance has a point there, doesn't it?
No, not really. In 2020, I was on Radio 4 talking about this quite a lot, and I wrote a few articles about the world changes. Sometimes the world changes, and in that moment, I've got certain jokes that I could tell on a certain day or in a certain room. I probably wouldn't tell that joke because I don't think they would understand the target who the target is. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes things you can say can be misconstrued. I think that social media has made, in a way, people more responsible. If you're going around and you're joking about trans people and you never met one, and then you go and you write that online and trans person goes, excuse me, like, you are being held accountable. But if you're really, really funny, you could make jokes about anything. It just depends.
Okay. Layla?
I'm loving this discussion. I took it a slightly different way. You know, what makes me proud? And I think music and our language, go ham. Yeah, I learned that today. But we've got such an incredibly flexible, incredible language. And I spent most of my childhood not growing up in this country. My mum's Palestinian, my dad was a diplomat. We grew up all over the place. My first word was, So you'll know. So I'm a proper third culture kid. And actually, I felt so British.
You sound so English.
I know, right? It worked. I know. But wait till you get me around an American person. It's very strange. Because it just sort of tweaks. And third culture kids have that sort of chameleon aspect to us. We will adapt to the situation we're in. But what it made me feel actually was very British, because I spent most of my childhood going to English clubs and British clubs, because you go and seek out the other people who speak your language. And it wasn't until I came to this country and then people started othering me because, you know, I have a slightly different heritage. I didn't quite grow up here. And no, I don't fully know the rules of cricket, even though I did the scoring at school. And I ended up learning that. I was terrible at it anyway. But, you know, it's really funny how people view their own Britishness, English. But I love our language and our music. Like, even now we dominate. And you look back to last summer and it's people like Charlie XCX all over the place and, you know, Brat Summers. And
is that a popular music beat combo?
It is a musical beat combo lady.
Yes.
Who's incredibly successful.
I had a Brat Summer last night. I think it was well known. I did ask Twitter.
Did you
I said, I think I'm having a Brat Summer, but I don't know what it means. And I got a lot of answers, some of which were not terribly obliging, but it was an interesting experiment.
But the point is, like, it dominated the world for a while, and you know, this is incredible innovation and creativity that comes from this country. I was reflecting on the conversation about the English bit of it. Why Welsh? I mean, it is bigger. The landmass is bigger. I think. When I think about, I feel really rooted in Oxford now, not just because I'm the people. I live there. It's actually literally the longest I've lived in any place in the country. But Oxford used to be part of Mercia, so maybe I'm Mercian, or I'm definitely a Southerner. And I speak to my northern friends who are and they've got a really strong Northern Britain identity that I feel like I don't belong to. So maybe it's a landmass issue and accents and history. But there's a lot to love about this country, and it's true, we don't talk about it enough.
Is St Barnabas Church in your constituency?
Yes, it is. It's beautiful, isn't it?
I should be coming to speak there.
Are you now?
November on my new biography of Margaret Thatcher.
What date and how do people buy tickets?
It's I can't remember, 2nd of November, something like that.
Well, there you go. People of Oxford, go.
Right, time for our fun question, which I'm afraid I forgot to warn you about in the break, because I usually tell them what the fun question is in the last break so they can think up their hilarious answers, but I forgot today. So I'm not expecting an awful lot, if I'm honest. It's from Jacob in Islington. A Hollywood film is now being made about Toys R Us. As bizarre as this sounds, which other shop should have a film made about it?
Oh, my God.
Oh, my goodness.
Does it have to be a current shop?
I mean, Ann Summers, possibly? That would be my choice.
I would say something like...
Could it be comedy? Does it have to be comedy?
Well, I don't know.
If it's tragedy, it would be W.H. Smith.
And does an online shop count? Or does it have to be
I'm
physical?
Sure it does.
Okay, well, that's opening up the... I still don't have an answer. I mean, I genuinely want to watch the Toys R Us one, because my dream as a kid was to get locked in and my parents forget
Toys
me there.
R Us
I think it should be something quintessentially English and something like Woolworths, or do you remember Quick Save?
Woolworths was American.
Was it?
Yes.
Well, I don't care. But you know the English shops that they have, like, you know, that we used to grow up going to.
Penny
You know what I mean? Yeah,
Timothy White.
Penny Sweets and all that kind of stuff. I think they should be set in the 80s and have a really...
C&A.
Yes.
Which is Dutch.
Yes, and Tammy Girl and all these awful shops and Burton and... Can you imagine? Yes.
Fishery.
Yes.
There we are. We're going right back.
That's going back a bit.
We're just all showing our age right now.
Well, the pound shop probably. You could, with inflation, it's probably the £10 shop now. But
Dickens and Jones. I was very fond of Dickens and Jones.
Timpson's,
I think a film.
That'd be a good one.
Yes, yes.
How do they cut those keys so well?
Yes,
They learn in prison.
Because they've all been.
No, I know.
We could have a political
No, that's
aspect
the-
in that, because two of the Timpsons were, well, one's currently a minister, one was a minister, so you could have a political aspect to that.
I think
Sure we got
that's
anywhere with
enough
that.
of that malarkey. Thank you all very much. Now, Monday's panel includes the Imam and broadcaster Ajmal Masroor and the Labour MP Alex Sobel. They'll be here to answer your questions, along with two other nameless people at the moment. Thank you all very much indeed. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to return to the subject of Englishness, as it is sort of St George's Day today. It usually is the 23rd of April, but because it's within a week of Easter, apparently it has to be delayed for a few days. But there we go. But I want to know what it means to you to be English. And when you say that you're English to people in other countries, what do you think that means to them? How do they see the English? And why is it that the other three countries that make up the United Kingdom, they all have their Saints' Days, which we're all very happy for them to celebrate, and yet somehow we've always been a little bit reluctant to celebrate St George's Day in England? Why is that? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Donald Trump's attacked Ukraine's leader, accusing him of prolonging the killing field. The US president claims Volodymyr Zelensky has a choice between peace or 3 more years of fighting and the loss of his country. Downing Street insists talks today in London made significant progress. Former Conservative Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland told LBC Donald Trump isn't helping broker peace.
He's behaving as if he's an agent of Putin rather than an honest broker. And the more he admonishes Zelensky and the more he undermines Ukraine, the more he does damage